Okay, so now I think that we can start. So I'll just remind everyone who maybe has just joined, please don't forget to choose your language channel. We have interpretation available in Spanish, French, and Russian. So if you want to hear interpretation, you just have to make sure that you choose your correct language channel, whether it's English, Spanish, French, or Russian. And now I will just welcome everyone here. So welcome to the StreetNet webinar, Street Vendors and Media, how to accurately cover our stories across the world. My name is Margarida Teixeira, and I am StreetNet's Communication and Media Manager. For those of you who might not know, StreetNet International is a global alliance of membership-based organizations of informal traders, street vendors, market vendors, and cross-border traders. We currently have more than 50 affiliated organizations in Africa, America, Asia, and Europe. And our goal is to unite working, voiceless, unorganized, and marginalized street and market vendors and other informal traders in the struggle for their socio-economic rights and justice. And we do this through strengthening their voice, visibility, and legitimacy to influence policies that directly affect their lives. So today we are here with some fantastic speakers from informal economy workers organizations and news media to discuss the representation of street vendors in the media. So often these workers are considered to be people who are, for example, working outside of the law. Sometimes they are thought to be a burden to tax systems and detrimental to urban life. However, we know that is not the case, and that's what we're going to talk about here today. But we are also aware that journalists and communication professionals can play a very important role to deconstruct these negative stereotypes. So therefore, in this webinar, what we hope to do is to kickstart a dialogue between representatives of informal economy workers, global communicators, and also media professionals. So from our side, we will provide you with the perspective of these workers, and we hope to hear from journalists present here in the second part some tips on how to accurately portray underrepresented communities. So in the first part of the webinar, we will hear from Oksana Abud, StreetNet's international coordinator, about street vendors themselves and why they matter. After, we will hear from Lorraine Sibanda, StreetNet's president, about why is it important for street vendors to articulate their issues and combat stereotypes. And we are also honored to hear from Sally Rover, the international coordinator of WIGO, Women at Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, about how street vendors' issues can relate more broadly to the global agenda. And at the end of these interventions, we should have the chance for a short discussion before we take a break. So we ask all of our speakers just to be mindful of time because we do have a packed agenda today and we hope everybody has a chance to speak. So now to kickstart all of this discussion, I will pass the microphone to Oksana Abud, who is StreetNet's international coordinator since 2019 and first joined the organization in 2012 as organizer. Previously, Oksana also worked as international secretary at the Confederation of Free Trade Unions of Ukraine. So please go ahead, Oksana, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, dear Margarita. Hello, everyone, again. So nice to see you all here. Thanks for joining our webinar. And yeah, StreetNet International is proudly saying that this year, in November, we are going to celebrate our 20th anniversary as StreetNet was established in 2002 in Durban, South Africa. That's why we are so happy and proud being of service of 20 years for our main constituency, which is street vendors and market vendors around the world. So I'm very happy today for our event, as it is for us in StreetNet for the first time, to arrange such kind of webinar, which is very needed and which was developed by our great StreetNet communication team, led by media manager Margarita Teixeira and prepared and promoted by Irene and Eleni. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate your great work. So as for our main constituency, street vendors, they exist over 100 years and always provided essential goods services and food to people usually approaching them on the streets, but in many cases being chased or evicted from the so-called working places, which is their working place, and which is usually a public space. So they were always crucial and very similar concerns and issues for street vendors, such as lack of recognition as workers who contribute to local and national economies enormously, and accordingly lack of social protection coverage, disrespect as humans, and of course, negative stigma, which still exists over street vendors as some nuances or criminals in many countries of the world. But street vendors are definitely more than just essential contributors to the economies of the countries and cities. They're also part of city infrastructure, culture, and its own beauty. For example, street food vendors not only provide affordable products to the urban poor, but preserve and maintain the traditions and culture of the nation. They cook in front of you, and they demonstrate all the amazing skills and recipes of delicious traditional cuisine, which you would definitely love and remember, and which will bring you back to have it again in the same place later. So that's why one of our main objectives, especially for our media, is to try to shift the mindset of society about this specific category of workers and highlight the value to be represented also and to properly treated. Street vendors are visible, but the challenges they face on a daily basis need to be seen and heard more, as well as we don't know a reality of, for example, a woman street vendor who still can smile to you selling a very tasty mango, but at the same time carrying so many troubles on her shoulders and being still disrespected and discriminated. Again, I don't want to take a lot of time. Thanks to everyone who joined us today as this very important webinar, where we will try also to find different ways, approaches to be engaged with different media and media outlets in order to better articulate the concerns and needs of street and market vendors, because they have to be more vocal and visible at different levels, to be heard and properly represented, and as well as to feel themselves as decent citizens of their own countries. All the best, and I wish to all of us a very successful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Oksana. Now I'm going to introduce our international president, Lorraine Sibanda. So Lorraine is based in Zimbabwe, and besides being the president of StreetNet, the first woman president of StreetNet actually, she also heads the Zimbabwe Chamber of Informal Economy Associations, which is our affiliated organization in Zimbabwe. Lorraine has long been a champion of informal economy workers and also women's rights. Since her student days, but also when she had to leave her job as a teacher to provide for her family as an informal trader. So we hope to hear from Lorraine about the importance of street vendors to articulate their issues and to combat stereotypes. So the floor is yours, Lorraine, if you are there. We know that sometimes Lorraine struggles a bit with connection.
Thank you very much, Margarita. I'm here.
Yes.
I struggled with the background today, but not with the connection.
It's great.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you, Oksana. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you for setting up this important webinar. I'm going to also be brief to allow time for conversation. It is important for street vendors to tell their own stories. Street vendors and informal economy workers should tell their own stories so that they articulate their lived realities, because usually the authorities and other people look at street vendors, as Oksana has said, as a public nuisance. In Zimbabwe, we have a challenge that the local authority bylaws actually still refer to street vendors as a public nuisance, which should actually be the opposite, because more than 95% of the population cannot be a public nuisance. It is true that 5% can be, if we were to talk about a nuisance. But yes, street vendors do have a lot of lived realities. Firstly, they provide much needed livelihoods for their families. Some of them also contribute to the communities that they live in. In that, you will find out that we live in communities that also have got orphans created by the different pandemics and also different circumstances. Informal economy workers and street vendors stand in the gap to also provide for these orphans, even as they battle with providing for their own families. And during times of hardship, especially the women who make up the most big number of the street vendors and informal economy workers, they also act as community workers as well as caregivers. The burden of care continues to rest on women, and most of the care work that we do is unpaid care work, looking after the sick and also the elderly and the children. And as we talk about the different realities that we come across, as street vendors, we have a right to sexual reproduction as well as the results. We have a right to have children, but under the circumstances, the conditions under which we work and the inability to work freely and realize the full potential of our livelihoods amidst harassment and violence bars us from enjoying these rights. Because as a woman, when you fall pregnant, you need to have access to maternity leave so that you bear a healthy baby and the body can rest. But we do not have that. And added to that, when we give birth to the children, we have to take them to the market as babies, and our babies are open to a lot of dangers when they do not have proper childcare. So it is also these babies' rights to have a right to play and a right to be babies as well as a right to be children. So street vendors' rights are not only confined to individuals, they spread to their families, they spread to communities. And as we provide basic and essential services to communities, when we work under very difficult conditions of harassment, the community also suffers. They cannot get the cheap commodities that they usually get from street vendors. Yes, because they know that the community cannot haggle at the supermarket. They cannot negotiate with the supermarket to reduce prices, but they do so with the street vendors. And the service that we offer is flexible, even though it works against us in most cases. And when we talk about social protection issues, social security, we are looking at access to pensions, access to medical aid, as well as universal health care. Because when we talk about universal health care, during the pandemic, a lot of us suffered. We could not access the quality health care because it's expensive. We have to stick to the public health care, which is usually inadequate and compromised. And as we go forward, social dialogue is a critical component of accessing any workers' rights. And as street vendors and informal economy workers, we do not have a seat at the social dialogue table. That has got to change. And we need to speak for ourselves, even at the social dialogue platform. I think in brief, I try to be as brief as possible. That is where I can add so that we open up for conversations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. And it's great to hear from someone who is a street vendor herself and also a women leader in the informal economy. So now we're going to hear the final intervention from this first part of the webinar from Sally Rover, WeGo's International Coordinator. So Sally has over 20 years of experience studying the ways in which laws, policies, and politics shape the informal economy and workers' organizations. She has been involved with WIGO since 2005 and has become international coordinator in 2018. And Sally has also written extensively about informal economy workers for media outlets, including, for example, The Guardian. So please go ahead, Sally, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Margarita, and hello and welcome to you all. Thanks for joining us and for the invitation to be here. It's my pleasure to join you today. So I have I'll attempt to share some slides. I just have some photos that will, or images that will help us locate some of the discussion. But basically my task is to talk about how we can think about street vendors in the context of global issues. And sorry, I'm just looking for the screen share button, but I'm not seeing it, so maybe I won't do it. In thinking about how do we view global issues from the point of view of street vendors, I think it's helpful for us, in order to get there, to think about how street vendors relate to economies and societies in general, and then think about how that relates in turn to the global issues. So I think there are four things for us to consider. First of all, we can think of street vendors in the context of being part of essential urban systems. So Oksana and Lorraine have already touched on this point, but let's take something like food distribution, right? So in order for consumers, this is sort of the consumer angle, in order for consumers to access food that they need, fruits and vegetables, as well as prepared food, they need a food distribution system that is accessible, that is affordable, that sells smaller quantities at lower prices, when and where it serves the needs of households and also of small businesses. So those households and businesses are reliant upon street vendors to help distribute food and other types of goods. So that's one angle that we can kind of consider, the consumer angle, right? A second way of thinking about how street vendors relate to economies and societies then is as part of the workforce. So this is sort of like the worker angle, right? So when we consider about how does an economy generate jobs, street vendors are there generating their own jobs, right? In the absence of employment opportunities. Otherwise, street vendors create their own jobs, but they don't just create their own jobs. Where you have markets develop in cities, there are all kinds of other forms of income generating activity that surround street vendors. So if you think of a street market, there are also market porters, there are also transport workers carrying people and goods to and from the street market. There are, all those sorts of visible employment opportunities that are related, but there are also some less visible ones. So for example, a shopkeeper might offer storage to a street vendor, and that would be a form of income generation. So there's all kinds of employment opportunity related to the sale of goods and services in public space. So that's a second angle. Then we can think of also the corporate angle, right? Which is essentially street vendors as part of distribution systems that corporations rely on. So if you think of telecom companies, for example, who sell those cards for airtime, in order for them to reach the broad consumer base, they need street vendors who are able to make those cards available to people when and where they are able to buy them. And then finally, you can think of street vendors as part of national production. So this is sort of like the government angle, right? They're not only generating jobs, but they're also moving goods and services through the economy, contributing to government revenue and so on. So we have these four angles, right? The consumer angle, the worker angle, the corporate angle, and the government angle. So what makes all of this possible in really any city anywhere is some form of agreement between all the stakeholders who are making claims on public space, right? So there are the vendors themselves, but there are also other workers, there are residents, there are shopkeepers, consumers, commuters, and the government are all making claims on space. And there needs to be some set of rules that govern how that all works. But the fact is, cities need these sorts of areas. They need natural markets with street vendors. And oftentimes it's governments that are defining the rules of the game there. So how does then all this relate to global issues? Well, let's think of any, sort of major global issue of the moment. So let's consider, for example, the current global food crisis. So food prices are up more than 80% higher than they were at this point 2 years ago. They're expected to rise another 20% at least in the next year. There's no end in sight to rising food prices. So how can households cope with rising food prices, which is a global issue at the moment? One way, again, is to source inputs from vendors who sell in smaller quantities, as Lorraine said, in more flexible ways, and at lower prices than supermarket chains. Much of the population simply can't shop at supermarkets, and so this is where street vendors come in. So that's a consumer angle, right, of a global issue. You could also think about where street markets have been evicted, so where the rules that I was speaking about earlier have changed, as happened during the lockdowns. A lot of governments took advantage of that to evict street markets that they thought were dirty or inconvenient or whatever. So it's not only the vendor's household, it's not only the vendor whose earnings are affected, but their household, as Lorraine was saying, entire households are reliant upon the income generated, and also all of those other workers that are related to those places. So again, thinking about how street vendors are embedded in these urban systems helps us think about then how they relate to the global issue. Just 2 more points and then I'll close to keep it short, like the others. One is, so let's consider just briefly another global issue, which is women's rights. So street vending and market trade represents a major source of employment for women. And this is not always visible, but we try to make it more visible through statistics, through research, and through dialogue. And this is especially important when we consider, first of all, that in many contexts, women's opportunities are limited, and this is one of them. Secondly, that any economic activity enables women to take part in decision-making in their households around income and assets and so on. Third, that women disproportionately absorb economic shocks. And so it's important for them to have economic opportunities. And finally, again, it's not only just the workers, but it's also households that are dependent on the earnings. To give a sense of scale very quickly, in Senegal, we just worked with a partner there to do a statistics brief. Street vendors and market traders alone constitute 38% of total women's employment. So out of every 10 women who work, almost 4 of them are involved in street and market trade. So it's a major source of employment for women. And just to close, I'll say, I think from where I sit, one of the most common ways in which I see street vendors represented in the media is around eviction drives. So this is something that generates, coverage, eviction drives, and that's kind of when street vendors tend to show up in the media. But when we think about the context and all these systems and all the interconnectedness between governments, between corporates, and between the formal economy and the informal economy, there is a lot more to be told in terms of stories and a lot of ways in which those stories link very clearly to the global issues of the time. So I hope that gives us a little bit of food for thought, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally. So now that we've heard from our first 3 speakers, we can start our short open discussion. And in this part, I really encourage the media professionals that are here, since you have the opportunity to speak with Oksana, Lorraine, and Sally about how to cover street vendors issues, but also other people who have been also covering these issues either in their own organizations of informal economy workers who have research on these topics. If you have anything to add, if you have anything to start the discussion, please go ahead. You can raise your hands, that might be better, or if not, just unmute or write on the chat so we know that you want to speak. Isabella, yes, please go ahead.
I'm always a volunteer to speak up. So I don't miss an opportunity to talk with you. I'm super glad that I discovered your organization. It was like a very nice meeting with Irene. I just wanted to make, like, maybe it's a question to all of you, because I'm not sure which one of you three would like to answer about that, but it's like, or maybe it's for the communication team too. So what is your main goal when communicating about the street vendor? Is it like formalizing it or decriminalizing it, or in terms of image, or you really want to make each one of them talk to the audiences or talk to the bigger world? I just want to understand in terms of a strategy how you deal with that. If that's a question that you can answer, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure if any of the speakers would like to come in to answer.
So it's, to make it simpler, it's like how you want your organization or the global alliance to be heard of, as just like a bridge of individual voices from the street vendors or from the market vendors, or is there a common goal that you want to put outside? That I'm very curious about that, because I think that shapes how you want to dialogue with the media too.
I think that the media team can also help answer that question, but in the meantime, I don't know if, for example, Lorraine or Oksana, in the case of StreetNet, if you would like to add anything.
Okay, I might start. Thanks, Isabella, for your joining us, for your participation. Yeah, in terms of StreetNet goals and strategies, of course, we are dealing with many strategic goals in StreetNet. So first of all is to facilitate properly the recognition of street vendors as workers, as part of labor movement, even though they are self-employed or on-account workers, as it is designed by the ILO, even International Labor Organization. So we are mainly here as those who facilitate, including formalization process, because we have access to information, to international instruments. So how can we help and strengthen our affiliated organizations to equip them with all of this proper knowledge, skills, so they are able to speak up for themselves. So it's not like patronizing, it's mainly assisting and equipping them with those proper tools, and of course, capacity building, set of knowledge, including how to negotiate properly, because as Lorraine pointed, social dialogue is a big issue for us. We even have our motto in StreetNet, nothing for us without us, which means all the decisions which are made and discussed about street vendors, about us, so they should be articulated by us also. But it's first of all, yeah, it's about recognition, which is a big issue, and eventually it brings many other issues, including social protection, or to be recognized as workers by labor code, for example. is about taxation, because one of the stigma is also that street vendors, they are those who are tax evaders, which is not the case, because if you provide or develop proper progressive taxation system, so then they are more than happy to contribute. It just should be also affordable. And yeah, one of those area is about smooth and gradual transition from informal to formal economy, which we are also like playing probably one of the key roles here for our members to help them in using this instrument. So yeah, it's a lot about political will, of course, and we understand it, but we also would like to have our own proper niche at international level, at regional level, how we can better represent our constituency. Because we have affiliated organizations, which means not individual, but organizations. So we have a criteria which should be followed before joining StreetNet as a member, to be fully participating in StreetNet life and decision-making processes. Yeah, maybe I will stop here, and I think even Sally, maybe you can talk about public space, also right to the city.
So I see that Lorraine would also like to add something. So first I will give Lorraine the floor. Lorraine, are you there? Or did you raise your hand?
I'm here. Thank you, Margarita. To answer that question and add to what Oksana has said, I will start off from, I'll use decent work, the definition of decent work as my diving board. Because in all the work that we do, our efforts are actually zeroing down to saying we should have decent work, even as informal economy workers. And once decent work is part of the agenda, then we are assured of a holistic form of formalization, a formalization that's going to bring conducive conditions for workers to work, grow, and be protected as well as regulated. So the definition of decent work is that decent work is not just about a source of income, but most importantly, it's about personal dignity, family stability, peace in the community, and economic growth, which expands opportunities for productive jobs and enterprise development. I think that definition sums it all up for why we are really pushing for the respect and recognition of workers in the informal economy. Because at the end of the day, it also covers why we are pushing for formalization, a holistic formalization that also is human rights based, as dictated by the ILO recommendation in 204. We also look at decriminalization. Yes, decriminalizing the image of informal economy workers is very important. Decriminalizing the image of the vendors is very important, because in most countries and most places where they work, it is not a matter of choice, but this has been created by the policies elected by the different governments in place, the decisions taken by governments, which has driven most countries into an economic path that has seen a rise in informality.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you, Margarita.
So I think that next, that was Zeleny, but she's telling me that we can pass the word actually to Sally first. So Sally, if you want to come in, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Margarita. Just to build on what Lorraine was saying, I think, you know, particularly at the global level, there's this, the ultimate goal would be actually to challenge people's assumptions about street vending and to change kind of mindsets of how street vendors are viewed, because there's this narrative that will turn up in every sort of corner of policy circles that says the informal economy is unproductive and therefore it's something to be tackled. We need to tackle the informal economy. How to tackle the informal economy, you know, how to, and which essentially implies it needs to be got rid of, right? And so, because when from an economist, a macroeconomist point of view, you're looking at the economy as a whole and saying which parts of the economy are more productive. Well, it's the formal economy that's more productive. And so the informal economy there's this narrative, right? It's inherently unproductive and therefore must be gotten rid of. And there's a very short line, to my mind, between those sorts of macroeconomic arguments and a government evicting a street market. Because if you're hearing the message, we need to get rid of the informal economy because it's unproductive, then the way to get rid of it is to bulldoze it, right? But so there's this blindness to the fact that actually everyone depends on the informal economy. Consumers depend on it, corporations depend on it, the government depends on it, consumers depend on it, commuters depend on it. It's the informal economy and formal economy are not two separate economies. It's all part of the same economy and it's all linked, right? So we need to be able to challenge this narrative that about the informal economy as a whole that very quickly translates into problems for street vendors in particular because of their visibility in public space.
Thank you, Sally. I think all of this is really helping to understand and to answer better Isabella's question. But I think that we still had Kendra and Eleni that wanted to come in on this. And then I'll also give the word to Charles, one of our members from Uganda. Eleni, would you like to come in now, or do you prefer I give Kendra the word first?
No, please give our guests the word and I'll come in last. It's fine, thanks.
Okay, so Kendra.
Thanks, Margarita. For those who don't know me, I also work for WeGo as the comms director. So just to add to what Sally was saying, I think one of the things that we've been trying to do when it comes to stories in the media is kind of highlight the contributions of the sector overall. And one of the ways that we've done that is through our research. So I'm thinking about, you know, Sally talked about the different ways that street vendors contribute to, you know, consumers. So we've kind of done some research, in particular in Bangkok and Thailand, around how for consumers, actually street vendors, their reliance on street vendors as a source of affordable food. So that's kind of one of the ways that we've done that. I think as well, what we found is that to challenge some of the stigmatization that vendors face, especially in the media, and to challenge that narrative, it's important to put kind of a human face to the story. Because I think sometimes what ends up happening is the way that vendors are depicted in the media is really dehumanized. And so telling kind of humanizing through sort of individual stories and storytelling is an important thing, and it's something that we'd like to further explore. So kind of contributions of the sector overall, kind of the role of their organizations in you know, linking vendors to stuff like healthcare, to, you know, we have vendors who've organized in different countries to provide childcare in markets. So kind of showing kind of the role and contribution of their organizations as well. And then the other piece of kind of at the individual level, kind of humanizing their stories from their perspective, as Lorraine was saying.
Thank you, Kendra. And Eleni, I'm going to give you the word now because I think that Charles might start thinking, introducing in different topics. So if you can go ahead, Eleni.
Yes, okay, thanks. From a communications perspective, and me being the most recent member, I think, in StreetNet, I think it's very important in the era of inclusivity that our culture is trying to communicate, It can't preach inclusivity for some groups, in some groups of society, and not for some others. So I think some extra noise needs to be made in a good sense for the street vendors and for all they contribute and all the issues that they have to deal with, because I think that this isn't communicated enough. People have to know all the dangers and all the challenges that they face through the media, and this is why we need their help in order to be able to give them a voice so they can vocalize and, as Kendra very wonderfully put, humanize them through these through the portrayal of their stories. So I think it's very important to, let's say, uncover the sort of hypocrisy of our society that tries to say that we're in an era of inclusivity where we're not, because we are actually discriminating against certain groups within the community. So that's how I see it from my point of view. Thank you.
Thanks, Eleni. And also to add something that our coworker Nash, the organizer for Asia, also wrote in the chat about workers' agency, that media representation also doesn't reflect usually the power that workers have to mobilize themselves. And that's something we saw a lot during COVID at StreetNet, what we saw our affiliates doing, but yes, not something that was present in media stories about street vendors. Now I'm going to give the word to Charles, who is our member from Uganda, from our affiliate in Uganda. Charles, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is, once again, I'm Charles, better from Uganda, market vendors, street vendors. I'm happy to have met most of our seniors around here who have been with us during all the campaigns we have been running through for media. My most concern is about what Oscar has just said about representation into social protection, public space. We have a problem that we have been reporting on so many issues around, especially on Africa, and most of parts of Africa. We have reported some common issues, some common patent issues that some media have failed to take attention of. And it is unfortunate that most African countries will have some common interests, some common demands, which we have been placing over and over since the COVID-19 outbreak. And since we last received the COVID-19 recovery program for communication from StreetNet International, and when we started reporting about these issues, the issue of cities development, the city, this program of city development has brought a lot of problems that many street vendors have been just away from streets. And we have tried to report on WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, on StreetNet platform channels. And we are happy that some of our countries and Uganda have tried to at least adjust and provide some decent spaces. But the problem which I want to place before this discussion now is about collective issues that are affecting a region, especially for Africa. The problem of relocating markets from the cities, the problem of removing street vendors from the cities and not providing alternative spaces. We have reported about that. And I don't know whether our international coordinator raised it during the Summit for Sustainable Cities. This is something that we needed some kind of a resolution to come up with for our states to have some kind of an adoption of how they can relocate street vendors as well as markets. Secondly, when reporting to most of our local medias, they tend to marginalize most of the issues that we raise for informal economy due to informality. You find that you raise a story to the media so that the authorities can hear about it and it is not given attention. It comes maybe even later when all the people have been affected. I don't know whether this is a strategy which is used by the state to oppress other vendors. Because you raise a problem like of us relocating of markets, not honoring market courts orders, among others. So these are the issues that we are interested in reporting to you so that at a certain stage they are brought up and have been handled at another level, whereby locally it cannot be handled. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles, for sharing your experience. And I wanted to let the participants know, we actually have a lot of people present in this webinar that are, like Charles, representatives of our affiliates from several countries, many of them in Africa. And we encourage, even if not everybody is from our affiliates is willing to speak or make an intervention like Charles did, if you want to still write in the chat, present your organization, leave your contact in case any of the journalists present here might be interested in reaching out to you later on, feel free to do that. And from StreetNet side, we are also available for any inquiries. So we're almost close to the end of our first part, but before closing and going to a very short break of 10 minutes, I just wanted to ask if there was anybody else who would like to add something, share a reflection, anything like that. If so, we have Jessica also from Uganda, so I'll just let Jessica speak and then we'll go for our break before the second part starts. Jessica, please go ahead. Jessica, you're muted. If you're trying to speak, we can't hear you. You have to unblock your microphone. Okay, not sure if Jessica might be having some sort of connection problems right now. If not, is anybody else who might like to add something for us to close this first part of the webinar?
Okay, I might add a bit about role of street vendors also in implementation of sustainable development goals of the UN. So if we are looking at those 18 SDGs, so particularly in each of these SDGs, there is part played by or contributed by informal economy workers as well as street vendors. So we even developed one of sort observation, and Margarita might share in chat also about our particular role as street vendors, how we really contribute from our place in our own countries, in our own cities, to implement the sustainable development goals. Because we are talking about this global agenda and the role of such actors like street vendors, it's not seen, it's not properly spoken. So that's why, such issues, they have to be highlighted also, because it also will help us in changing or shifting mindset about street vendors, as well as to build a very good and proper StreetNet profile. Thank you.
Thank you, Oksana. I think there's only Charity who would like to add something. Charity from Zimbabwe, I think.
Yes, I just want to add something, especially on the issue of media covering informal workers, even information which affects informal workers. You find that they don't publish it well beforehand when they are going to do their cleanup operations, which affects most of us as workers in the informal economy. You just see here, it's like today, tomorrow they are coming in with their bulldozers grading everything down. To me, they should also put the issues of informal economy, which affects them, on the front page of the papers, even on news, on social media, on the news and all that. Then also as informal workers, we do a lot, we contribute a lot to the GDP. This is the gross domestic product. Like now, it is in the case of Zimbabwe, almost 90% are in the informal economy. We are making sure the children are going to school, the children have food, everything is centered on the informal people. So they must recognize us as people who are contributing to the socio-economic issues of the country. And to me, I think as the informal economy, we are now the economy of the most countries in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Charity, for sharing your perspective. Now we have only one more person to speak, and then I'll really have to close the discussion, which is Gladys. Gladys from Malawi, right?
Yes, thank you. I'm Gladys Mponda from Malawi Union for Informal Sector. As workers in the informal economy, we are the one bringing the economy of the country, and we need recognition and inclusive in the in making bylaws. When they make bylaws, they don't include us. We just hear that today the levy is gone up, tomorrow they change. When they are meeting, they meet those big business people. With us, we just hear that they have changed things without including us. That's what we need to lobby for recognition and inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you, Gladys. So Gladys is from a representative from our member in Malawi. And it's great to be in a webinar where we actually have a lot of the workers present to speak about their own perspectives, which is something that does not always happen, but that StreetNet has also been supporting workers' organizations to be able to digitalize and can contribute more in these discussions. Now, I really have to close this part of the discussion, but we hope that in the second part of the webinar, we also have some space at the end where workers can come in again. And we'll also hear from communication professionals of workers' organizations, both from StreetNet affiliates and from other organizations of informal economy workers, and also from journalists and media professionals. So for now, we can return at 4:05 South African time. And I guess I'll see you there. So enjoy your short break and we'll be back soon. Especially the interpreters, please do enjoy your short break.
Yeah, probably.
Thank you to everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And I think we can start. So Eleni, please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you, Margarita. So we're moving along with our session now, and we would like to welcome Fungai Munetsi from the Zimbabwean Chamber of Informal Economy Associations. Fungai will be speaking to us about the stories of StreetNet vendors from a grassroots perspective. So Fungai, welcome. We are ready to hear you. Thank you.
Wait, just before we hear Fungai, Eleni, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay. Yes. All right. Thank you, Margarita. Yes, I'm Eleni Rosali, and I am StreetNet's digital consultant since February this year. And I'm very happy and proud to be on board this amazing team that has given me much inspiration. So that's pretty much about me. So let's give the floor to Fugai now. Fugai, are you connected?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Greetings, everyone. My name is Fungai Munetsi. I'm the Information Officer for the Zimbabwe Chamber of Informal Economy Associations, ZICHIA. So ZICHIA is a membership-driven organization representing informal workers and traders in Zimbabwe. So as an information officer, I joined ZICHIA in 2011 while I was specializing in general hardware in the informal economy. So ZICHIA capacitated me as a young worker in the informal economy through workshops, trainings in the period between 2011 and 2014. I was elected as the youth chair for ZICHIA Chitungwiza territory in 2015. So whenever I attend ZICHIA workshops or training, I spend most of the time assisting informal workers with technology on their smartphones. So that passion for technology resulted in ZICHIA leadership giving me the position of the media intern for the organization in 2017. So by that time, I created ZICHIA social media platforms, be it on Facebook, Twitter. We also created territorial and national WhatsApp groups. We also created the YouTube channel, the Instagram channel. So in 2018, I was elevated to a full-time information officer. In my work as a media officer, I've seen informal workers articulating themselves, sharing lived realities and practical solutions. So it is important for associations to create platforms for informal workers and traders to speak for themselves. I've seen that informal workers and traders are creative and are very innovative. Some convert, in our case in Zimbabwe, some convert waste materials into handcrafts, manufacture nice shoes. Some even started a worker-led social solidarity economy schemes like the savings and credit cooperatives and grocery clubs, where they contribute little by little every week or every month and buy grocery in bulk, then share after a period of 6 months. The same applies, they can even save money together and share after 6 months. So my interaction with the workers and traders in the informal economy has been easier for me because I have worked in the informal economy and I understand the issues and challenges they face on a daily basis. And sometimes I also understand how the media and authorities perceive these workers. Informal workers and traders are always perceived as public nuisance and criminals, like the area presenters have articulated, but in reality, they provide services which are affordable and nearer to the people. They also contribute to GDP and national development instead of resorting to criminal activities like they are always labeled. Most they provide food for themselves and families, as well as sending children to school. The challenge they face sometimes whenever there is a pandemic or an outbreak, here in Zimbabwe, the authorities usually point the informal workers as the root cause. For example, they cause the outbreak of cholera, and they are mostly affected in terms of demolitions, which are usually supported by outdated bylaws. So what we have done as an organization since I joined the media department, I have worked so hard in terms of encouraging informal economy workers and traders to tell the stories in their own way, in the language which they are comfortable. We have resorted to having a translator. Sometimes if one is speaking, even sharing anything in Shona, in our local language, there are other local languages that we also have to translate to, so that the message, if they are sharing the message, it has to reach everyone, be it on the ground, be it the authorities. So documenting positive and life-changing stories on the ground has helped the organization and members to demystify the myths and criminality associated with informal work. This includes, we have been visiting them at their own workplaces, gathering their opinions on the future they want. We created several platforms for them to share stories in their own way, like I've earlier articulated. I created a podcast. We conducted interviews on the ground where members share, where they share their opinion, be it if the authorities want to make a decision that affects them. We have given them the platform to give their input. For example, earlier this year, our government conducted consultations in coming up with the national formalization strategy. We complemented that effort by gathering the voices of the workers on the ground. We traveled throughout our 46 tier territories. We recorded, be it in the form of audio, videos. Some we had to edit the videos, put subtitles for authorities so that they can see and hear what is it that they should include and what is it that works for the informal workers. And also what we have done as an organization during trainings and workshops, we capture members in action, speaking their minds. For example, we also ran a campaign on hashtag I'm not a criminal, respect my working rights. This campaign was aimed at instilling positive attitude from the government to identify and connect in the campaign language by declaring processes that promote regularization of informal work and not view them as threats.
Sorry, Fungai, you have
Yes.
about 1 minute. Okay,
yes, I'm about to finish.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So what I'm trying to say is looking at the challenges informal economy workers face on their daily lives, it is important to create platforms for them to speak. Also, capacitate them. Apart from documenting their own stories, we also have to capacitate them so that whatever they want should be clearly articulated.
Okay, thank you very much, Fungai. That is very interesting work that you are doing there, and thank you for sharing your stories with us. I would love to hear some more about it in another point. So now I would like to introduce Karina Kaufman Gutierrez, the Deputy Director of the Street Vendor Project. Karina has a long experience in policy development and community organizing. She holds a master's degree in international affairs and urban social policy from Columbia University and was recognized in City and States Labor 40 Under 40 in 2021. Welcome, Karina, and we'll thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And so glad to be here with everybody. And thank you to everyone who's shared already. It's such a pleasure to learn from you as well. My name is Karina Kaufman Gutierrez, and I'm, as mentioned, the Deputy Director of the Street Vendor Project. To share a little bit about what we do. So we are a 2,600 member strong organization in New York City that champions the rights of street vendors as small businesses to earn a living and contribute to the culture and life of New York City. So we're very, very much tied to the culture of our location, right? Highlighting that New York City is the most diverse, especially where I live here in Jackson Heights and in Queens. There's over 100 languages spoken here. And that's something that we really try to highlight through our work and is highlighted throughout Street Vendor Project. And part of my work at SVP, I do our communications work, including press and social media. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about the work that we do in collaboration with the media at large, but then how we communicate stories on our own terms, right? And what some of that difference is, and what are the strategies and principles that we hold when we're doing that. So I was really struck by Sally's comments earlier today about, in so often the stories of street vendors that are told in corporate media or in more traditional, for us, it's CBS, it's CNN, right? ABC News, all of these different news channels, that what they really tend to highlight is not the stories of street vendors themselves, but of those who view street vendors as not a part of New York City, or as they want to highlight that street vendors are not legalized, are not formalized, right? And that's like the one talking point that always gets carried through. But often, right, when this talking point comes through, that's an opportunity for us to organize in person against it. Or it's often used, media is used as a retaliation against street vendors for organizing. I'm going to share one in the chat, one particular article that came out last year when, as a retaliation for organizing. So I just dropped it here in the chat. So in Fordham Road in the Bronx, which is an area where many street vendors have started up post-pandemic, there was, we have a huge base there of about 200 vendors who've come together to organize for stability and for a permanent place along Fordham Road in the Bronx. And as one of the strategies that vendors came up with as wanting to stay, they wanted to first highlight the contributions that they make to the area, as well as organize a protest to show how much harassment they were receiving. And so we organized a protest, one of the first in that area in the Bronx, where street vendors were really coming to the forefront, bringing in elected officials, bringing in local support. But the morning of the protest, the local business improvement district, which is, quote unquote, organizing small businesses, but is actually run by local real estate companies that view street vending as negative, right? They actually sent us a cease and desist that morning, the morning of the protest, and said, you cannot do this here. And we, said, of course we can do this here. It's public space. Street vendors have a right to this neighborhood, and we're going to continue as such. But the retaliation was that this business improvement district hired a lobbyist, hired a PR firm, put out a press release against street vending. And this was one of the articles that resulted the CBS piece that's here, which, while we had our own press for the march, it was nowhere near in comparison to what a paid lobbyist and a paid PR firm can do to promote the opposition stories. So I share that here as an example of what money can do when it comes to the media, two, who the media is often listening to, right? They're looking to who has the PR firm that will pay them the most or will get the message out to them directly, and not the street vendors. And so really, as our work as SVP, what we've done, similar to what's been shared earlier, is focus on creating our own narratives and creating our own channels, primarily through Twitter, through Instagram, and a little bit through Facebook, but mostly through the other two channels. And for us, we see that power is inherent to storytelling. And some of the questions that we ask as we're creating our own media, right, is who is telling what story, from what perspective, using what form, and who are the gatekeepers, right? When we look at media, is this story good for me? Is this story good for my community? And is it good for workers? And again, it's usually not when it's in paid media or when it's in the more corporate media that's out there. But when we are doing our own organizing and our own narratives, we lead with 3 primary principles. And the first one is shared values, not problems. So narratives, making sure that narratives that vendors are bringing forward are links to the shared values that we hold as a community and as an organization that are shifting opinions towards structural solutions and change. Thinking about what are the values that bring us together. Sorry. The values that bring us together. Examples of justice, dignity, caring for one another. Those are shared values, not problems. And that's something we always try to highlight through our narrative storytelling. A second one is bringing people into the frame, right? That piece that I shared earlier, it is dehumanizing. There's not a single individual street vendor featured. There's no storytelling there where people are sharing their own perspectives. So what we do is it's always the voices of vendors themselves saying, who are we fighting for? Who are we fighting with? So highlighting our communities, highlighting immigrants, highlighting excluded workers, and also using that tactic to highlight who do we need to move, right? Who are the decision makers, the politicians and the skeptics? What are their faces? What do they look like? What do they do to make sure that they are also getting that individualized personal attention on social media so that they can't escape, right? And then the third is that we're also offering a solution. What is something good, right? What is our solution? We're not just highlighting something bad, right? We're not highlighting just harassment, which needs to be shown because so often it's not, but we also always want to tie that with a solution. What are our policy proposals? And that really helps to sustain the will to fight, not just among our own membership, but also among those who are skeptics, right? Or those who are on the fence. So that's one of our key areas, is using social media to really bring vendors' voices to the front. I'm also going to share just in here, this is an example of some of the media work that we do through Twitter. So we held a overnight sleep out in front of Governor Kathy Hochul's office last year. Governor Hochul is the governor of New York State, and we have a campaign to legalize street vending so that there's no cap on the number of permits and licenses. And a key part of that, right, is to say who's being affected by this policy, what are we proposing instead, and what are the things we want to highlight, right? So in each testimony that's highlighted in here, everyone is sharing who they are, where they come from, why street vending is important, how they are personally being impacted, and highlighting what they want instead, right? As you can see, most folks in this particular series of this particular thread were speaking in Spanish. So a big part of our work as well is to translate. We're not so good at captioning yet. It's something we're working on, but at least in the tweets itself, we want to make sure we're translating from different languages. And that was a really key component so that people see, people are not just sleeping out, but they're sharing their stories. We're keeping it active. We're asking people, DMing people on Twitter and on Instagram to repost and get the word out there so that there's more eyes, and we're creating our own attention on this issue, right? We're not relying just on the media.
Sorry,
and then
Karina, you have 1 minute. So we can
perfect.
Thank you.
Going to share that there's just two other ways there's two other primary ways that we use social media. One is to share positive stories, often highlighting the disconnect between what the policymakers believe and what actual New Yorkers believe, right? And how they see street vendors. So I'm going to share another example in here of a collaboration that we did recently with someone who's pretty famous on TikTok as a foodie, but he really is caring about street vendors, right? As individuals who are those who make the food, right? So that there's not this disconnect between the output and the person who is making it, but it's actually put together. And so that helped us to reach a new audience. And then a third one is trainings. Right? Trainings both for vendors themselves within our community, but also for bystanders. So people who are their clients, right? For when there is an incident of harassment. So we do a lot of know your rights trainings with vendors as well as with their clients so that they know what to do of harassment. What is your legal right? Can you film, right? How, if you're a bystander, what should you say? Should you share things on social media afterwards, or do you need consent first? So really going through some of these questions to make sure that it is understood that vendors have agency in this when they're being harassed and have rights. And then if we do share those incidents on social media, it's coming from the voice of the vendor, right? Sharing, this is what my experience is being harassed, and framing it in that way. There's always a question after that of organizing, right? When there is a viral incident of street vendors being harassed, how do you actually mobilize that online media attention into actual tangible results, or people signing on to something at the very least, right? If not policy change, we have some sort of commitment when there's this viral moment happening. And I think that's, often the public wants to fundraise an individual GoFundMe for the vendor who's being harassed, which is valid and very important. And I think as an organization, what we try to do is steer that public attention into pushing for long-term change. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karina. That was a very powerful intervention. I love the part about the trainings for the vendors and the bystanders. I'd love to hear more about that. Thank you very much. So now we shall give the floor to Genevieve Shaw. Genevieve is a human rights activist and philosophy and economics student. She is active in numerous organizations. She has been a youth reporter for StreetNet International since 2021, where she has acquired a lot of experience in covering stories on street vendors in Guinea and Senegal. So, Genevieve, we're happy to have you with us. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Bonsoir à tous, j'espère que vous allez bien. Moi, c'est
Hello
Dina.
everyone, I hope you're well. I'm a student of philosophy and economics at the Institut Schalke. This year, I'm doing management of waste at the market, and through this subject, I've been able to meet a lot of street vendors in the markets. They have a lot of difficulties because the area they practice their trade is not appropriate. There's as well, there's a lot of problems with the police. The government had to put people in place in the different markets to take them away from the road side. A lot of street vendors today are on the side of the road, and this is causing accidents. And they don't realize, because when you ask the street vendors, why don't you go off the side of the road and go in the market, they say there's not enough space, or there's already too many vendors in the market. They also say that by the side of the road, commerce is better or easier, but it also has consequences. Many street side vendors they have problems with police, because the police is there to support the population and defend people, but they actually take money away from the street vendors, so they're only looking for and there's also a lot of bullying. I'm talking to you as a vendor, not as a reporter or journalist or a member of a commission or human rights or anything like that. I'm speaking as someone who has experience of practicing commerce, and I know what the difficulties of the street vendors are on the ground. When you have goods, imagine you're selling goods on the side of the road and a policeman confiscates your goods and fines you for 5 or 10 euros, or bribes you, asks for 5 or 10 euro bribes so you can recuperate your goods. Maybe your goods are only worth 40 euros, something like that. So imagine if someone confiscates your goods and asks you to pay $20 or $25 before restituting it. You imagine what it does. Basically, you're working for nothing. There's a lot of children in the streets as well. You can see children that are 4, 5, 6 years old. They have tray on their head and they're supposed to be at school, and instead of being at school, they are reselling. Can you imagine what it does? The education is not wasted, but also the family. The children have. Oh, the children is in charge of a responsibility for his family. If he doesn't make money, his family can't eat. This is the element that most affects me. I can't even express what I feel because I didn't have that kind of childhood, but I didn't have an easy childhood, but I didn't have to go to sell in the street for my family's livelihood. If you're a child, you're 6, 7, 8 years old, you're selling water, I can send you some images because I've got some pictures here that I took coming.
Excuse me, Jennifer, you have 1 minute to wrap up, please. Thank you.
Okay. Au lieu d'être à la maison, ils sont là à
Instead
revendre.
of being at home, they're there selling things, and I think it's not good. We should have a look at the situation and create a platform where the sellers can express themselves, because a lot of the vendors can't write or read, but we need to explain it to them in all the dialects, because in Guinea we have 5 or 6 different dialects. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for your very powerful discussion. Very interesting. Okay, so now I'll pass on to Irene, media team.
Yes, hello, hi. My name is Irene. I'm from the StreetNet media team. I'm also the person who bothered you for the past 2 weeks by email, so it's really great to be here with all of you. I would very quickly move on to the next session, which is devoted to our media case studies. So first of all, I would like to thank all the journalists and the reporter who agreed to be part of this webinar. We are really grateful to all of you for being here, and we hope that the webinar is of your interest so far. First of all, I would kindly ask you, all of you, to keep your presentations quite short. We are a little bit late with the time, so in order not to waste anybody's time and to keep up with the schedule, I would ask you to please be brief and try to be under 7 minutes if possible. So the first person I would like to introduce is Isabella Moy, who is the co-founder and executive director of Agência Mural. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly in Portuguese, who is based in Brazil. And so please, Isabella, if you want to make an introduction of your work and anything else that you might you might think it's interesting for this session. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Irene, for the invitation and for the happy meeting encounter that we had. I just want to say that I'm really impressed by the work that you have been doing for 20 years, like the whole organization, and about like all the people who came here to speak. Like I have been listening and taking notes, so I'm really I will investigate a lot of links and reference that you left. So I'm gonna be very, very short, so we have time to for dialogue and conversation, which I think is the objective of this meeting. And I can share with you if you want. I have prepared a presentation, but I think there's no time, but I can share the link if anybody wants. So we are a local journalism organization that aims exactly what you aim, is to deconstruct stereotypes and stigma, but not only about street vendors or market vendors, but about the low-income population of the great metropolitan area of São Paulo. Sorry, I'm from Brazil. It's the largest metropolitan area of South America. It's 21 million people, and around 85% is what we call low income, which in Portuguese we call the periferias. So our organization has been covering the news for exclusively about those communities for 12 years now, and we have a local team of a full-time team of 20 people and a network of local correspondents of 80 people. It's not enough yet to cover all the neighborhoods and all the cities, but we are doing pretty well, I think, half of it at least. So I think one of the things that we really stress is that my whole team lives in the areas that we cover. So that's why I was very impressed about Fungi news networks, news channels, because that's the base of our work. It's the people who live there, and there are journalists, are the ones that are covering it, because they can really cover all the complexities of being a resident of those neighborhoods. And one thing that I have wanted to stress, because I have been listening to you about humanizing and decriminalizing, and a lot of words that we use in our daily work, is that we have two golden rules. For example, that we don't cover security issues or crimes or police brutality, because that's what other media cover about our communities. And we don't cover also what we call the good deeds of big organizations, because that's also what money, somebody told us, I think, about what the power of money can do. So we don't cover like anything that comes to us through PR services or press communications, like communiqué de presse and things like that. So we really focus on transforming. It's not about like being proud of being poor and not criminalizing poverty. Is really about naturalizing that everyone is part of the same population and they deserve to be treated equally. And that's why I asked you about the overall objective, because I think it's more or less the same. It's like when you talk about informal economy to transition smoothly, I wrote down that too, somebody exactly like said, a smooth transition into formal economy. And I think that's like the objective that we have too. It's like that the whole city is part of the whole city, and the whole infrastructure is shared by everyone and not concentrated in the center in our case, and only available to a small part of the population. So I'm not going to take long, because I know there's a lot of people to talk. I'm going to share the link for our presentation. It's a PPT in our Google Drive. And if you want to have, there's like my email, my contact, photos and everything if you need. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabella, also for sharing the presentation. And if you need help in accessing it, you can just message us and we can relate to you. So the second person for this panel I would like to introduce is Busani Bafana, who is a journalist, an award-winning journalist from Zimbabwe, who covers development, climate change, and food security. So Busani, thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Makeza. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Busani Bafana, as already said. I write lead on development issues across Africa. I've done a little bit in Europe. I've done something in Brazil as well, many years ago. I'm delighted to be part of this discussion. I also have a presentation, very short. I'll be happy that we can share it after that. But I thought to approach my participation here, what do we do as journalists? Many people assume journalists know everything. Journalists don't. And one of the tragedies that we actually face today is that we assume that journalists are magicians. They are actually going to do everything that you wish and hope for. So I think the starting point really is for us to explain basically what do journalists do. In brief, I think I want to look at 4 things that the media does before they actually carry out the work that we expect of them. They are chief listeners. Journalists are there first to understand what is it that's going on. They are wordsmiths. They are the people who use words to tell a story, to convey messages. And I'm going to talk a little bit further about the issue of words, because when I got this invitation, when you talk about street vendors, already to me that word is loaded with negativity. Why are you calling them street vendors? They are vendors, right? They just happen to be on the street. So is that really a crime? We're already attaching a connotation there. Journalists are also potters. They shape opinion. They shape ideas. And the ideas that they have to work with are there. And lastly, journalists are storytellers. The work of the media is how to actually portray the story, but the stories that we tell are layered by several things that actually happen in our environment. And then how do we go about telling this story? Looking at the whole issue of the informal economy, I want to say the starting point is, who are you? This informal economy is about people. So the first thing we want to know, who are these people? What happened to them? What are they doing? And these are the questions that we want to ask and ensure that in talking to the people in this informal economy, we first understand who they are. And why is your work important? Why does it matter? That is important in part of telling the story. I'm surprised that you are saying you want to bring in the media to help you tell your story. Listening to the narratives that we hear, you don't need the media. You already know your story. You need the channels of actually putting it out widely. All that you need the media for is to really plug in the media, bring in the media to understand that story. Why I want to underline that your work matters. When I was just doing the research, 61% of all workers globally are in the informal economy. If we take, for example, in my country, it is said 90% people are in the informal economy. That will actually include freelance journalists like me, if we are stretching the definition of that informal economy. Besides, the statistics also show that 2 billion people are actually part of that informal. So they are very, very important. 2 billion out of global 8 billion. In telling the story, we also want to look at ethics. How do we go around this stereotyping? We are actually applying the ethics in how do we tell the story fairly? How do we bring in the balance? Here we have an economy that is ticking. This informal economy provides food. It provides jobs. It provides security and a whole other benefits which are not in the media narrative. And I believe that is very, very important. But then I was also asked to look at the question, how then do you who have a story and us in the media who tell the story, how do we relate? I want to flag in 3 key points. I think us as the media, we want to be interested in the story. There is no way you could tell a story well if we have no interest in it. Interest is not bought, nor is interest sold. Interest is generated. And one challenge is that we generate this mutual interest, that the media is interested in the story. It is important also to be transparent. We as the media, we want to be transparent, open, and tell you what we want to do. Why do we ask you the questions that we do? Why do we interrogate the work that you do? Because we want to be sure that you feel safe in relating your story, which brings also the point of the media needs to build trust with this informal economy. It needs to build respect so that you are free to tell your story, because I also realize from the many narratives, the informal economy, street vendors do not make it into the mainstream media. Where they do, the narrative is negative. I've seen words, perceptions, domestic workers, sex workers, waste pickers, informal traders, all those built in a connotation. But for us to be able to tell the story, we as the media, we also want to inculcate that spirit and build trust and respect. And lastly, we in the media, we should not be biased. The whole underlining, I think, of creating the good narrative about the informal economy is that the media should not be biased. I was surprised many years ago when I did a story with sex workers in Zimbabwe. I was very prejudiced. When I was given the assignment to go and interview sex workers, I said,
Uzani, you have 1 minute, sorry.
Right. So I said, sex workers, what does that mean? So already the word, when I even approached the subject, I was already biased, but I was very much surprised at what I was able to build the trust about the story, and I was also able to tell the story fairly. And then also, lastly, I want to mention that it is important that we should also, in covering this informal economy, we want to talk about the whole issue of how do we tell the story effectively. The story is told effectively when we are in the know. So it is very, very important that we build in this collaboration and actually trust between the storytellers and the story and the storytellers and the people who have the story. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all these great points that you raised. I think they're all very, very relevant to the discussion of today. The third speaker I would like to introduce is Mathilde Dorcadi from Equal Times. She's a journalist, and maybe she can also give a brief presentation of her work. And again, if you can stay in 7 minutes, that would be great. Thank you, Mathilde.
Oui, bonjour, je vais parler en français si c'est possible. Merci déjà pour
I'll
cette...
speak French if possible. So I'll start by saying thanks for the invitation. It was really interesting for me to listen to everything that's being done and to see that you were able to unite this whole panel of different protagonists, which enables us to be able to speak about this topic from different perspectives. So I was invited because I'm a writer of a media called Equal Times. I don't know if some people maybe already know this media. I'll try and be brief on the presentation so that I can stay within the minutes, within the allocated time. I'll share with you guys in the chat our link about us so that you can see a description of our media. We'd just like to remind you that we are a media that covers news on social justice and the world of work in 3 languages, French, English, and Spanish. We write about the whole world, and we were created with the support of the Union for International Work.
presque quotidiennement des
And we
articles
publish on a daily basis
écrits par des
articles
journalistes
written by
dans le monde
journalists
entier,
in the whole world,
mais aussi nous avons une
but
section
also
d'opinion, nous
we
avons
have an
l'occasion
opinion
de pouvoir
section,
aussi
which is the
publier
opportunity to publish
des textes qui sont écrits
texts
par des
that are
chercheurs, par des
written by
militants. Nous avons aussi
researchers or
une
activists.
section
We also have a section
de questions-réponses, on publie des
for
photos
question and
reportages, etc.
answers,
Donc,
picture
ma
reports, things like
présence,
that.
enfin voilà, je pense qu'elle est aussi intéressante pour les
So
journalistes
my
qui
presence
aussi
here is, I think, maybe interesting for the
qui
journalists
nous
that are here,
écoutent et
that
qui
are
auraient
listening, and that would have
des idées
maybe
d'articles à proposer
ideas for articles
sur
to
le
propose
sujet
on the
pour
on the
les
subject
sections journalistiques
for
ou pour
the
les
journalistic
personnes qui
sections,
travaillent dans
or
les
for
diverses
people
organisations
who
pour
work
lesquelles on
in
présente,
diverse
si elles souhaitent aussi
organizations who
soumettre des
also would
textes
like to submit texts
d'opinion
or
pour notre
articles,
section
opinion
blog ou
texts
notre
for our blog
section
section
euh, opinion piece.
or opinion
Donc,
pieces.
plusieurs organisations qui sont présentes ici, comme WeGo, comme StreetNet,
So, for
ont déjà
example,
eu l'occasion de
WeGo,
publier
StreetNet have
chez nous,
had
par
a
exemple.
chance to
Donc
publish
voilà comment
on our
ça
website
fonctionne
before.
essentiellement.
So this is how it
N'hésitez pas
works.
toutes les personnes qui sont présentes à
Don't
venir vers
hesitate
nous et
to
à nous proposer
contact
des
us
choses.
if you have any things you want to propose.
Dans le lien que je viens de vous mettre,
In the link
il y a
I just sent you, there's
les adresses email
there's all the email
des
addresses
trois
the
rédactrices en chef pour les trois
for the
langues.
three
Comme
chief
ça, vous pouvez entrer
writers
en
for the three
contact
languages. So you
avec
can
nous.
contact us.
Par rapport à ce qu'il vient de dire aujourd'hui,
Regarding what was
c'est vrai que moi je trouve qu'il y
was
a
said today,
énormément de
I
sujets
think
qui sont
there are a lot
à
of
aborder,
subjects
énormément
that
d'angles à
we need to talk
proposer.
about, a lot of angles that we
Évidemment,
could
nous
look
comme
at.
médias spécialisés
Obviously,
dans le monde
as
du
we're
travail
a
et la
media
justice
specialized on the
sociale,
work,
tous les sujets, tout
on
ce que
the
vous
work,
avez
the world of
souligné
work
comme
and social justice, a lot of
le
the
fait
subjects that
qui
you
touche
mentioned,
le travail décent, le travail
like
informel, qui sont
decent
on a
work,
énormément
informal
d'articles qu'on
economy,
a déjà
we have a
pu
lot of
publier à l'occasion. Peut-être
articles that
à un
we've
moment, je
published
vous ferai
already.
j'enverrai
I could
quelques liens
maybe send
sur ce
some
sur quoi on a déjà
links
publié,
in the
mais
future.
c'est presque le cœur de notre travail qui est de
It's
parler régulièrement
very much the
de tous ces
heart of our work
sujets-là,
to
le
talk about
travail
these
informel,
subjects,
le travail
the
décent, la question
informal
des
work and
femmes, la
decent
question de
work, the question of
l'éducation,
women and
la
education,
question du dialogue social
and
avec,
also social dialogue
avec les gouvernements, la
with
protection
governments,
sociale.
social
Enfin, tous les angles
protection.
quasiment sont intéressants et
All of these angles are interesting
valides pour être
and are valid
explorés.
for being
Donc,
explored and discussed.
j'ai déjà moi-même appris beaucoup de choses
I've
aujourd'hui
learned
et en
myself a
tout
lot of things
cas,
today,
je suis aussi journaliste.
and I'm
Comme je
also
disais souvent,
journalist. So, like
on a
I
des
said,
journalistes
we
qui nous
often
proposent des
have
choses, mais
journalists
peut-être
who
aussi ça peut me
offer
donner moi
us
des idées
things,
ensuite à aller
but it could give
proposer
me
à
ideas
certains
as well to
journalistes
propose
qui
to
sont dans
some of
certains
our
pays
journalists in.
des idées de sujets aussi. Concernant la relation qui a été évoquée par
Regarding the
rapport
relation
à
between
comment faire passer
how to
toutes ces histoires-là à
pass
des
these
médias,
stories to the media,
évidemment, c'est une question très intéressante.
I
Si
think it's a really
j'élargis un petit peu
interesting question. If I
à
enlarge the
ma seule
scope
position, oui, je trouve que ça
slightly to
devrait
my
être traité par
position,
beaucoup plus de
it should
médias.
be treated by a lot more media, I think.
Equal Times est un média
Equal Times is
spécialisé,
a
donc
media
forcément,
is a
c'est peut-être plus
specialized media.
facile
So yes, for
de
us
toucher
maybe
un
it's a bit
média
easier
comme le nôtre.
to
Mais
get in
je
touch
comprends
with
tout
a
à fait
media
que le
like us, but
challenge,
I
c'est aussi
understand that
de
the
pouvoir
challenge is also
toucher
to be able to
des
reach
médias plus
out
grand
to
public avec
more
un
of
lectorat
large readership
qui serait
medias
pas aussi
with a readership that
sensibilisé, on va
maybe
dire,
is
que
not so
peut-être une partie du
sensitized on these
lectorat d'Equal
topics,
Times. Mais après, comme nous sommes aussi un média qui traduisons
but
les
also since
articles,
we're a
permet
media
une
that also
diffusion aussi plus
translates
large
articles,
de ces
this
histoires.
enables
Voilà,
spreading
ça
a
me donne
larger kind
l'occasion
of
de faire quelque chose
widespread
sur les
sharing of
demandeurs de
these
riz au
topics.
Zimbabwe. Nous, on va ensuite le
For
traduire en
example,
Mathilde,
espagnol.
you have 1 minute.
Très bien. Et ça diffuse aussi le fait qu'on traduise
so
à d'autres
the fact that we translate some of these articles
à des pays
to
qui seront peut-être pas
other
forcément couverts
countries
dans cette
that are
langue-là.
maybe not covered in that language.
Et puis après, nous sommes aussi un média sans
We're also a media that
paywall, donc qui est aussi
doesn't have a paywall,
disponible
so is available
sur Internet
on the
de
internet
manière très large, etc.
for a
Donc,
wide readership.
c'est aussi
So
une bonne opportunité
it's a good
d'avoir aussi une
opportunity
presse
to have
qui
a
est gratuite et qui est
press
traduite
which is
et qui
free and which
permet
is
aussi une
translated,
plus grande diffusion, même si c'est pas
which
le cas
allows for
effectivement partout.
wider
Donc,
sharing of the
ce
information.
sont des vrais défis effectivement
So these are obviously real challenges to be as wide as possible, to reach as many readers as possible. and speak to them in these stories. And I'm available if you have questions to finish. I had to summarize quite quickly.
Thank you, Mathilde. I just want to say that we will try not to be more than 15-20 minutes late on schedule. I know that some people have to leave, so we will try to be as quick as possible in wrapping this up. The next person I want to introduce is Louise Donovan. She's a reporter specialized in labor issues working for the Full-Net Project. Welcome, Louise, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm Louise, a reporter with the Full-Net Project. Just to share a little bit about the Full-Net Project, we're a global newsroom dedicated to groundbreaking reporting. So our goal is to catalyze positive change for women. And we do that by reporting stories that otherwise wouldn't be told and trying to expose injustice with in-depth journalism. This is done through our partnership model. So our stories appear in outlets such as the New York Times, Time Magazine, and Vice World News. In my case, I cover labor. It's a beat that I've been cultivating over the last 3 years at the Full-Net Project. And it started when I was embedded with a newsroom at the Daily Nation, which is Kenya's largest newspaper. And that's when I kind of became properly aware of the issues faced by, the hundreds of thousands of domestic workers who leave Kenya for the Middle East each year. And that was the beginning of me kind of looking into this in the informal economy and the issues facing those workers in that economy. I haven't written specifically about street vendors, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about how to tell workers in the informal sector, so domestic workers, garment workers, waste pickers, or how to tell. I've written stories about all of those workers, how to tell their stories truthfully and kind of ethically. And I think a lot of this stems from developing a beat on the sector and really building up your expertise. And I think once you start doing that, you kind of start to notice where the gaps are in the media, what coverage is missing, what issues are being overlooked. And then you really, I think, learn how to tell those stories with nuance. And so when the pandemic hit, I moved back to London. I knew, because I'd already been there, I knew domestic workers were probably going to be facing issues and hardship in the Middle East. And I knew this was going to worsen during a global crisis. So I was already on the lookout for issues that might be arising. And I was very quickly put in touch with a woman who was locked in a room in Saudi Arabia by her employers. I think she was with 8 other women. There was no sunlight. It was 1 meal a day. When we realized this abuse was playing out across the Gulf, I wrote a story about her situation. And as a result of that reporting, many of those women were repatriated home. But I think when it comes to identifying stories and finding sources, I find social media very useful, not just for reaching workers, but also as a way of understanding their issues. So I knew domestic workers were big Facebook and WhatsApp users. They're using it to chat to their families back home. But TikTok exploded in the pandemic and everyone was on it. And I was curious to see if they were on it as well. And this led me to writing a story about how domestic workers in the Gulf were using the video sharing app to bring their abuses to light. But again, I think this comes back to your beat and knowing what stories to look for and where. So because of my previous reporting, I knew about the kafala system, and that in some parts of the Middle East, if you're taking pictures or videos inside employers' homes and putting them online in a public platform, that can lead to criminal charges or deportation. So while it was amazing that these women were opening up about their lives and their conditions, I knew it could be dangerous to do so. So I think it's really like knowing the issue, knowing the local context, knowing where to look is important to be able to recognize what an important story is and then following it. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on building trust with sources. It was mentioned earlier as well. Many of the workers in the informal sector, they're in precarious and vulnerable positions. Why would they talk to a journalist? They're often suspicious or scared of me, and it can be really tricky to earn their trust. I worked on a story about abuse in a garment factory in Lesotho, which is a landlocked country in South Africa that produces clothes for Kate Hudson's athleisure brand. It's called Fabletics. The women were facing daily abuse and harassment. I worked with a local researcher, journalist in Lesotho, and that partnership I think is really important, to have that local knowledge and that context and that understanding of the complexities. But it took us many months to make contact and earn their trust. Once you do, it's a bit like the floodgates open, and like women pass your contact on, they tell your friends, they tell their friends they've spoken to you. And we actually ended up talking to about 40 women for that story. In the end, the main perpetrators were fired. You know, Kate Hudson was made aware of the story. They stepped in with a 39-point corrective action plan, a sexual harassment policies in place. So it had a good impact, but we were only able to do that because we cultivated the trust of those sources. And we took time to make sure they were okay. We informed them every step of the way, the process, that, you know, it was going in an international outlet. It could impact their lives. You know, were they aware of the very real changes that it could happen? And we got consent from all of them. And that's the kind of thing that you can't rush. Finally, I just wanted to stress the importance of staying with the story, you know, following up with your sources. How are things? What's changed? Are there any new issues arising? You know, you've already done the hard work. You've already got that very closed off community to trust you. Why make life hard for yourself? You know, go back in and check with them. I think it's really worthwhile staying on the story, especially in this sector. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Louise, very much, and especially about this last point. It's really interesting. The last person from our media case studies I would like to introduce is William Schalke. I hope his connection is stable enough. Yes, okay, he nods. So Will works for Africa as a Country, who is a media that covers mainly Africa. And please, Will, the floor is yours. Again, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you so much, Irene, and thank you so much to the Alliance for inviting me to this webinar. I'm going to be absolutely brief because I think I've been well captured by all of the contributions today. I've been enormously enriched by this discussion. So it's a tremendous honor to be a part of it. So I think the note that I want to touch on is, I think, what the work of Africa as a Country is. And just to give a bit of context as to who we are, I think a lot of people are caught off guard by our name because it says Africa as a Country. And of course, you know, that's not the case. But it began as a project which wanted to push against the narrative of how the West understood Africa as being this single homogenous place rather than a place of many diverse opinions, diverse peoples, and diverse perspectives. And I think if I could add to Busani's wonderful description of what the role of journalists and writers are, I think another very important one, and something that he was alluding to, is to transform social consciousness, to transform narratives. And I think that everyone this afternoon has touched on the various ways that can be done. And I think something that our work does, because we're not journalists who provide reporting, but mainly what we publish is op-ed style pieces, reviews, and the like. And I think that one of the key things that we try to do, and one of the beautiful and exciting things about making this partnership with this alliance, is that we want to push against the idea that there is no alternative, to a socio-economic system that is based on greed, selfishness, exploitation, and injustice. And what we try to do is publish writing that alludes to how we can have a different social imaginary, different order of things. And I was provoked by something that Sally said earlier about how a lot of the struggles of informal workers and street vendors has to do with struggles over claims of space. And I think space is a very interesting thing to think about, because when we are in public space, when we are in private space, when we are in any space in the world, what we take for granted is the question of whose space is this? Who does this space belong to? And I think something that we try to push is to say that this space belongs to the people. It's only out of the historical aberration that we've created a social economic system where space can be privatized, where property can exist, and that property is used to exploit and to make profit, that we create space that is inaccessible, and that capitalism effectively began from all of us being dispossessed of space that is rightly ours, space that we all own collectively. And so I think that what is important about what we all do is we are trying to push a different imaginary that says we can all collectively own the space, so that we no longer view the space as being rivalrous and something that we have to fight over. So we no longer view the space as something that people in being there are effectively being a nuisance, so that we no longer think of space as something that can only belong to certain groups of people at the exclusion of others. And I think that's, for me, the importance of the work and the presence and existence of informal workers, is they're making their claim on space. But I think all of us, journalists, in whatever work that we are doing, are all making our claims on space in the small ways that we are doing, saying that the space belongs to everyone, that everyone can have access to that space. And I think for me, this is what's incredibly inspiring about the work that is being explored here today. And something that we try to do and push is to say, how can we imagine a world where the space belongs to everyone, where everyone feels entitled to having ownership of that space and can assert themselves proudly and unapologetically in that space. So I think that's where I'll end, just that I don't take up too much time. I'll drop my email address in the chat. I'd be open and excited to collaborate with everyone here, and we can discuss that offline. But above all, thank you to everyone who spoke today, and I'm really honored to be here.
Thank you, William. I think that your words resonated a lot with many of us. And of course, like, you can keep discussing in the chat. This is open. So now I would like to move to the last, let's say, section and about the structured discussion that we would like to have. So we have with us the representative of organization representing informal economy workers, and especially some of the communications professional and some of the international coordinator or program coordinators. So I would like to give the opportunity to them to present themselves and maybe ask some questions to the journalists if they have something to say. The first person I would like to give the floor to is Janahavi Dave from HomeNet International. She's the international coordinator. So Janahavi, please, you have the floor, and you're free to introduce HomeNet International, and also to ask any question to kickstart the discussion at this point. Thank you.
I'd like to start out by thanking StreetNet International for organizing this very important discussion on how organizations in the informal economy can engage with the media. Thank you for sharing space with the global networks of other informal economy workers. We really appreciate that. Before I begin, I wanted to briefly talk about home-based workers. Home-based workers are workers who work from in and around their homes, producing goods and or providing services. They are both own-account home workers, like the street vendors, who have access to both raw material and markets, as well as piece rate workers, also known as home workers, who are providing work through the series of subcontractors. Now, home-based workers are part of both the global as well as domestic supply chains. The majority of home-based workers are women who contribute significantly to their families, communities, and national economies. However, they remain invisible and unrecognized. Now, as per our ILO study done in the year 2019, there are over 260 million home-based workers across the world, representing 8% of the global workforce. And of these 260 million, 147 million, or 57% are women. So we're talking about a large workforce within the informal economy, but also we're talking that it is a gender issue when we're talking about home-based workers. Now, like other informal economy workers, most home-based workers do not enjoy adequate economic opportunities, legal rights, social protection, or a representative voice. Now, this is where HomeNet International comes in. HomeNet International was launched in February 2021. The movement has been a very old movement, but we were launched in February 2021. We are a network of 36 affiliates from 20 countries across the globe, representing over 600,000 home-based workers. Our network aims to raise visibility and gain recognition for home-based workers as workers. That itself is very difficult for home-based workers. Build and provide solidarity amongst these workers who are very hidden and work individually in their homes, and work on common issues and use the power of global voice to influence the government as well as the employers. We believe that recognizing home-based workers as workers and the contribution is the first step towards guaranteeing their rights. However, the issues faced by home-based workers are many. Our sister organization, WeGo, Sally is here from WeGo, and HomeNet South Asia have conducted studies to understand the impact of COVID-19 on home-based workers. And just to mention briefly is that home-based workers were the worst affected within the informal sector workers as well, and are recovering at a much, much slower rate. While capturing this impact, we also found some great examples of what really worked for home-based workers in the pandemic. And that is where we found that social and solidarity economy may be the way for home-based workers. Our cooperatives and producer-owned companies have ensured work and income despite all the challenges. But we also know that we alone can't create visibility of home-based workers and their issues just by ourselves. We know that we need the media as well as allies to share light on the challenges and contributions of home-based workers in order to make home-based workers more visible. We understand the media coverage can get our message across and important information out to thousands of people with one story and influence change, which is what we need in the informal economy. Over the past years, we've had the opportunity to engage with only a few global media outlets. I mean, we've engaged with the Equal Times, we've engaged with the Fuller Project also. And we are hoping that, we continue to get to engage with some of these media organizations. Also, what we've seen is that the few affiliates of HNI have begun to engage locally with the journalists by inviting them to their events. We've had regional organizations like HomeNet South Asia and an organization called HomeNet Kenya who've invited journalists quite successfully. We've also seen that globally what has worked is the partnership that we have with WeGo and the other global networks. When we go together, we've actually got more visibility than otherwise going individually. At HNI, we hope to begin more proactive approach with media and start creating relationships with them at a global level. And at the local and regional level, we believe that we need to train our affiliates a lot more in media engagement. We hope to be in contact with all of you and share information about home-based workers and how it is relevant to wherever you're based. So I'm going to pause here because there's paucity of time, but happy to interact more later. Thanks, Ari.
Yes, thank you, Janahavi. And of course, I encourage everybody to be in touch with each other after the webinar. That's also one of the objectives. Now, I would like to see is Eduardo still online, because I know that he had to go. And I would like to introduce Eduardo De Rico, who is the communications manager at Global Rec, representing the speakers.
Yes, I'm still
Yeah.
sorry,
Hi,
but I'm
Eduardo.
out in the street. If you want to maybe invite someone else before, I'll be at my destination in about 5 minutes, and then I can talk in a more quiet environment.
Okay. So, right.
Thank you.
Sorry, I thought you were on a tight schedule, but in this case, I would maybe pass the mic to Kendra. Kendra is the comms director of WeGo. She already introduced herself at the beginning, but Kendra, if you want to ask any questions or raise any other point, also maybe talk a little bit about WeGo and your work. Floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks a lot. And a big thanks to StreetNet for organizing this. It's just been a really rich discussion. I think I've taken 10 pages of notes, lots to reflect on. So I think I touched a little bit on our work, and I think Sally introduced WeGo in the opening, but I guess from my perspective, I've been thinking a lot about, in the discussion, we've been talking about how to, shift these narratives around kind of the stigmatization and criminalization and the challenges that street vendors in particular come up against. And kind of one is the role of kind of responding to these crisis moments, when evictions happen, but also it feels like a lot of different panelists, Karina, for example, have been talking about, how we speak to sort of the positive contributions and really bringing out how organizations of street vendors are organizing, whether it's providing childcare, providing healthcare, providing affordable food. What are kind of, I guess this is a question to some of the media professionals, is we found sometimes it can be challenging to get those good news stories placed. And so what sort of tips do you have for, organizations like us that want to provide kind of a counterpoint to some of the negative news cycle? Yes, Nash puts in the chat, how should we pitch to you? Just recognizing that there's some proactive work that we could be doing to kind of challenge this narrative on an ongoing basis.
If somebody has something to reply to Kendra's question. Isabella?
Well, okay, our organization is an organization that is already interested in those kind of stories, so it's easier. But what we say is that like usually when in the mainstream media, what we talk about when we talk about sections of the economy and or like groups of people, it's that like we put a lot of numbers and we put a lot of like general statements, and that loses. I think somebody told about like humanize. I don't like the word. I try to avoid it, but I really think like we did a story like it's illegal in Brazil to sell things in common transportation, for example, in public transportation, in buses and trains. And that's a place where we have a lot of people selling goods and making their livelihood out of it. So when we wrote a story about a woman. So what we did is that we simply put a reporter to follow her from the beginning of her day to the end of her day. And we simply like showed like everybody that was reading that story that it was like a labor's work, a labor's day, like like it's a normal day, and that she has like she's not different from any other person, and she's doing her job. But we had to do it like for example, we did it as with illustrations, because we could not publish her photos, for example, because that would implicate in police searching her in public transportation, for example. Like it would be a denunciation that she is doing something that is illegal. So, but we put out the details of her life. That is not bad, or like we try not to put not in the perspective of being a heroic, not criminal, not in those three extremes. It's really like the middle way. It's always like normalizing those activities as part of our daily life, our reality. So I think
Thank you, Isabella. And now I would like to give the floor to Rula Segayer. She's the program coordinator for IDWF, the International Federation for Domestic Workers. And I will also share her presentation on my screen. Just give me 2 seconds. Sorry, Rula, I'm on my way.
That's all right.
Yeah, where is it? Share screen, okay. There you go. Let me know if you can see.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, StreetNet, for having us. So the International Domestic Workers Federation represents over 600,000 domestic workers around the world, and we have been trying to get those voices across. And we are learning so much from this stellar panel, by the way, so thank you so much for this. I wanted to start this presentation from highlighting a few trends that are quite problematic in the coverage of domestic workers in mass media. Mass media manufactures political sentiment and perpetuates systems of power. And in this landscape, the coverage of domestic worker issues becomes tainted. Domestic workers are often spoken of, but are rarely spoken to. And even when they are, mass media can reproduce harmful scripts pitting some workers against each other. For example, like you see on this first slide, a maid like no other is a soundbite that is used too frequently. And while no person is like another person, of course, domestic workers included, the discourse creates binaries of exceptionalism and mediocrity. So similar to what has already been said, that like the middle is kind of the right spot for the discourse to combat the worthy and unworthy type of language within the employment landscape, where rights should be inalienable, but they are denied. So then there are a few structural issues, if we can move to the next slide, that we encounter whenever there is an outreach for domestic workers to give some testimonies. First is the English language. A lot of the times the requirement is for them to be able to speak English. So that is affecting the access and the representation of the workers. Another issue we encounter is the urge to find a perfect victim, between brackets in quotation marks, a worker who is abused but who does not fear retaliation, a worker that fits a particular optic, racial or age, or any type of other profile, or a phoenix, if you wish, that rises from the ashes, because that also exempts the mass media from the responsibility of the follow-up that could be carried after an interview if that perfect victim is not so perfect, and there could be damage or like things to follow up on in the aftermath of exposing a particular news. So the domestic workers population is extremely diverse demographically, and it cannot be narrowed into that mold. And another noticeable trend is privileging the employer and government discourse over domestic worker voices, at times done as an attempt to nuance the article. Then moving on content for my next slide. This is not something that is done by progressive media, but nonetheless, like I wanted to mention the sob stories that appeal to a sense of pity and not a sense of justice. And domestic workers are portrayed as meek and voiceless. The pieces are not solution-oriented. It gives a sense of futility, a borderline, like Schutz says, right back in the foot, and a story that touches the heart, as if the abuse encountered by workers of the informal economy is food for catharsis for the reader. Like, that is not what we hope for when we seek coverage. Next slide, please.
Yes.
More dangerous, overt content is one that trivializes abuse. So the intentionally bizarre or humorous headlines, stories about domestic workers going insane and absconding their work or escaping, are reminiscent of women being diagnosed of hysteria, or reminiscent of a lot of language around slavery. The article that I have here about 5 signs to spot that the domestic worker is trying to flee include like her using her phone, meeting her friends on her day off, outright calling for additional supervision and scrutiny. The Romeo and Juliet of Kuwait, that article speaks of domestic workers who were imprisoned for having a relationship. So the focus is completely distraught. The humor often masks the seriousness of the situation, and such severe criminalization of domestic workers' autonomy becomes normalized, and domestic workers become infantilized in the search of a good metaphor for that article. And of course, finally, the next slide, there are stories that reproduce harmful discourse. It can be overt, it can victim blame in the name of righteous and nuanced reporting. For instance, reporting that touches on the rights and responsibilities framework is often flawed because rights are inalienable, and trying to balance out what is completely like ludicrous and humane situation experienced by a worker of the informal economy as if it were a two-sided street does not do it justice. And narratives can be also covered, and this is something that we do notice in some progressive coverage even, when some narratives are reproduced, but again, reminiscent of the language that an employer uses. For an employer, perhaps the best compliment that could be said is that the domestic worker is part of the family. However, domestic workers are employees and should be considered as such. As they say, as our membership says, we are not your family, we have our own. So to sum up, my last slide, domestic workers are diverse, they lead complex lives, and they are holders of knowledge, not simply informants. So I'm very interested to learn about how do you go about valorizing that knowledge that they hold, not simply them being informants, in the current landscape where there's a lot of oppression, potential retaliation. How do you navigate these barriers in order to provide newsworthy information? And if I can finish with a question, I think I dropped it in the chat box. When we try to pitch to the media, at times we are told that this is not news, but oppression is not news. It's something that is very historical, very structural. How do we go about that? Can you give us advice? Thank you.
Thanks, Rula. Is somebody, yeah, Isabella is writing, oppression is not news. That's a great quote, I think. If somebody has something to contribute to Rula's presentation, otherwise I would move to our last speaker, and then maybe we can wrap up with, you know, any other contribution that might come in mind. Or you can always write in the chat, of course. So I can give the floor to Eduardo. Eduardo is the comms officer of Global Rec, if he's still here and he can hear us. No, Eduardo, I think he had to leave. Maybe he had an appointment at some point, so maybe he had to leave. Okay, so if somebody has anything else to contribute regarding what Rula just said, or regarding any other points that were raised during this webinar, please feel free.
Okay. Well, I'm monopolizing this stage, so if anybody wants to, like, I'm super excited with you know, everybody's talk and speaking and meeting every one of you. I just want to say that Rula want your contact and your presentation. But I want just to comment on like oppression is not news. But I really think that the way we have been portraying it and the narrative that we have chosen, that it's discouraging. Somebody talked about like when we I think it was your presentation too, like when we victimize and when we offer no ways of people to react or people to know what they can do in their individual lives. Because if the problem becomes too huge or untackled, if it becomes something that I as an individual cannot do anything, it simply becomes no news. It becomes the same news that nobody's going to read. You know, and oppression continues to exist because we don't change the narrative. I think it's the same thing that we are watching that with climate change right now. Like, you know, it becomes too huge for us to tackle. So I think if oppression is something that you can portray as something that happens at your home, at your city, with your neighbor or with your somebody from your family, then if you offer tools when you're in the middle of the story, we try to do that, and we struggle to do that, to really offer tools and service to the audience so they can really change something in their daily life. I think that's when it starts happening something new in our narrative, and it looks like it's new because we offer the audience something that they haven't been given before. It's just, if it's just tragedy, you know, it's just tragedy. And sometimes we don't even read it. Sorry.
I also, just to jump off on that, I know when it comes to domestic workers, like especially in Saudi, there's just a lot of terrible stories, and yeah, I get it, like there's a lot and you just want to keep pitching the terrible, like, you know, stories that, and it gets there's not that much interest. But I think you can be smart about it. I think there's different ways and angles into it. So like, for example, how there's like a newer element to their current situation. So like TikTok, they're talking about abuses. TikTok is a new thing that everyone was like suddenly writing about. So you can like shoehorn it into like a new fun social media thing that everyone's talking about. Or, you know, I've done something on remittances and how during the pandemic, you know, everyone was suddenly using online remittances, but domestic workers just don't have access to those online remittances. And then they literally couldn't walk to the, you know, the physical Western Union, so they couldn't even send them home. And it was about how the, you know, the sort of like online remittances world had forgotten women, forgotten domestic workers, you know. So I think there's ways and means around it. You know, I think in Kenya they're trying to introduce some new laws about domestic workers. They're trying to like help them and protect them, and like, you know, I'm going to probably be looking at whether that's working. So, you know, there's still all those terrible stories, but you can like think of new ways into it. That's how I think of it as a journalist when I'm trying to keep writing about this stuff and because I still have to pitch to editors, and I'm trying to get their attention. So that's how I think about it. I don't know if that's useful.
Okay, so if anybody doesn't have any other contribution to Rula's questions, I would give the floor to Pilar Balbuena, who is our colleague at StreetNet. She's the head of global advocacy. Please, Pilar.
Thank you so much, Irene, and thank you so much, Margarita and Eleni, for putting together this webinar. I can still not believe how much we learn from all of you. And so I think we can stay here for many, many hours, and hopefully we probably will have a follow-up webinar. I just wanted to tie up some of the comments, because I'm just still like so impressed to hear about the strategies, all the work that is being done, Fungi, all the work that your organization is doing. It's amazing. Karina, you brought some points that were so incredible clear, and I love that strategy. It was so straight to the point. And I love the points that the journalists are bringing. Louise, Busani, you are bringing such incredible points for us to reflect. But I think, I mean, there are some points that as well we were asking, how we do pitch and a story, how are we relevant? And I think there are points that either we are driven by what is happening or we drive as well the strategy. And I think that is important to keep in mind. What is news, you ask, Busani? But what is news is as well what we can contribute to make the news, or as well to shape the narrative of the news. Because you made some points that were quite important about how some terminology is framing in such a negative way, but we can flip it around, right? Like when you talk about street vending itself could be a negative narrative in some countries, but not in all. And so you always, depending on the language, depending on the context, depending on the area, geographic areas of the world, some terminology could be negative in some areas, but not necessarily in others. And I wanted to bring one point in regards to shaping the narrative, like driving the news with what is happening in the news, or we making the news and shaping it. So for this, I want to share a little bit of the news, for example, to talk about how we can shape the narrative. So I'm going to copy a link here for all of you. And it is about something that is happening right now in Colombia. Right now, Colombia is driving the narrative with a street vendor law at the national level and at the local level. So Medellin started building a story about how street vendors policies could be a wholesome policy, social protection policy, urban policy. So this news that you see here in the link is in Spanish. If you click on it, the title says, this is a public policy of street vendors that are now generating doubt on the formal businesses. So this, I wanted to copy it, is because when a news of this kind comes, if we do not jump to frame the narrative together with what's happening, whoever is writing it can then just roll it in the way and shape it the way that they want to. We can as well jump in. And so what you were saying, Busani, is like, we need to, you know, the story is there, is how we jump in. We do need the help of the media, and we need to educate the media in order to help them and help us shape the narrative in a right way. So I'm going to share another link here, and it is about resources of how we can work together with the media in order to educate the journalists to help us shape the narrative in a right way. So right now in that link, if you click on it, this is a campaign that was put together by the comms team of StreetNet for the May Day, Busting Myths about street vendors. And if we work together and we look at these articles and we have media people like you guys, Busani and Louise and all of you, to work in helping us drive the narrative and then answer to these negative narratives that are being put there. And then we have the facts right here. You can just click quickly. The information, like as you said, Busani, is so much happening. It's so much information. So here it is right away, very factual, very clear. You can click through it. You can work with us together in then answer, no, street vendors actually contribute to taxes and we are not evading taxes as the formal businesses are saying. So it's a very quick click, very quick partnership of us working on driving a positive narrative for the sector. So I just wanted to share this very quick example of how, yes, the news is happening. Yes, somebody else is driving it, but we as well can jump in and in collaboration can help it drive the narrative and can make the stories in a more positive way, but as well, as Karina said, with a solution-driven more than the negative connotation being perpetuated. So thank you again, all of you, for being here, and thank you again for being friends of the cause. And absolutely an amazing thank you to Margarita, Irene, and Eleni. You guys are absolutely amazing, and kudos to all of you. Back again to you guys.
I would say let's wrap it up, Margarita.
Yes, so I would just like to thank everyone so much for your participation. For us at StreetNet to do this webinar was like one of our dreams, because we wanted to talk about these issues for so long, and we wanted to journalists and communication professionals together and to showcase all the amazing work that our affiliates are doing. So this has been really great. I think everybody who has been here, we've been hearing some feedback from WhatsApp groups and other channels, and I think people are really interested in everything we discuss here today. And I can also tell that there is a lot of interest from the organizations here to learn more with journalists. So perhaps in the future, we can think about a workshop or a training so we can actually talk a little bit more about all of these issues with you. So yes, thank you so much. And I hope that together we can make sure that informal economy workers can have their stories accurately and ethically featured in news media. The recording of this webinar will also be available on our YouTube channel in English, French, Spanish, and Russian. And I thank again all the interpreters who have been present and tirelessly been working, even though we went quite a bit over our time. And from StreetNet side, we're always available for inquiries from journalists and others that are interested in knowing more about our work. So make sure to visit our website, which is here. And just before closing, I would just like to ask our international coordinator, Oksana Abut, if she would like to add anything. Oksana, any last words?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I am also impressed by myself so much. Thanks a lot, Margarita and the whole team. I just can say that our dream came true. And I also believe it's just the beginning of this space that we decided to launch for engaging with journalists, for sharing a great experience. And personally, for me, I also learned so much. And those tips, how to make our story interesting, what should be the driven points, like spirit, or to be sincere in our stories, to really attract attention and influence the mindset of whom we want, how we can extend our audience in this new social media channels. Yeah, we might think about TikTok as well, because Eleni already raised this issue. Yeah, thanks a lot. And our great speakers, I'm also very impressed with your feedback, with your input. I really believe we just need to continue. So kudos to StreetNet communication media team and to all of you. Thank you so much and till soon.
Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to close now, but thank you. Thank you for all of your inputs.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye all.
you.
Bye all.
Thank
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Fungai. Thank you.
You have a fan club
Welcome.
now. I hope you know that.
Nice fans.
Yeah, a great fan base.
Muy importante. Buen día. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Muchas
Thanks,
gracias.
everybody.
Merci beaucoup.
Bye bye. Merci. Au revoir, camarades.